All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Limestone, the Foundations of Guelph event. We'd just like to start this evening by acknowledging that the city of Guelph, where the 2Rivers Festival takes place, is situated within the Dish with One Spoon Treaty lands between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and Haudenosaunee that bound them to share this territory and protect the land. Here in these river valleys, we have learned that the Attawandaron or neutral peoples were also among the original stewards. We'd like to recognize the enduring presence of the Aboriginal peoples on this land and the history of the First Nations peoples and neighboring First Nations, Métis, and Inuit. Today, there are a wide number of Indigenous peoples who call this territory home under the Haldimand Tract Treaty with the Mississaugas of the New Credit. We want to express solidarity with the 88 First Nations communities in Ontario currently under water drinking advisories. My name is Siobhan Blanco, and I am the marshal for this event as well as the 2Rivers Festival coordinator. This event is the Limestone, the Foundations of Guelph, and it's a part of the 10th annual 2Rivers Festival that celebrates and appreciates the Speed and Iramasa rivers. The theme of this year's festival is at the confluence of rivers, peoples, and their stories. We'd like to extend our hearty thanks to the Architectural Conservancy of Ontario Guelph Wellington chapter for sharing their passion for the rivers with us. And thanks to all of you for attending this event. The festival is organized and run by volunteers and involves many community organizations. Please support these organizations that are doing good work in our community. We'd also like to extend our thanks to our sponsors, CFRU, Mike Schreiner, and Mickey Shepard, who all made this event possible. You can see all of our advertisers on our website, and we have over 40 great events, some virtual, some in person, if it's possible in the future. This festival is a project of the Wellington Water Watchers. It's our hope that if we celebrate and fall in love with our rivers, we will want to further protect them. Just so everyone is aware, this event is being recorded. And if you don't feel comfortable being recorded, you can turn off your camera. And it is only the active speaker that will be recorded. Before we get started, I just wanted to do a couple Zoom housekeeping things. So as you're listening, just make sure that your microphone is turned off while the presentation is happening. If we do have a question and answer portion later, you can unmute then, or you can also use the raise your hand function. And just remember to keep our event space inclusive, kind, and respectful. And if you wish, you can also change your Zoom name to include your pronouns. So I will hand it over to our two lovely presenters, Leanne Caron and Susan Ratcliffe.
Good evening, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to our little meander through the quarries of Guelph. And I'd like to introduce you to us. So I'm Susan Ratcliffe with the Architectural Conservancy of Ontario. And my co-presenter is Leanne Caron, who's with the Guelph Historical Society. And Leanne, would you like to say any more than that about yourself?
Well, other than I consider myself your student always, Susan, your wisdom and your ability to find information, your librarian brain is always an inspiration. So, you know, this evening is really an accumulation of our collective knowledge from our respective organizations, but also a lot of research done with partners. Heritage Guelph has contributed to some of the research in this presentation, and I hope that our viewers find this to be as fascinating as you and I have found it to be. And I know that you've traveled through brambles and brush and forests in search of rocks. So I hope that our viewers this evening appreciate the field work that you've done putting this together.
Thanks, Leanne. We figured the other day that we're the only two people in Guelph that were having a lively conversation about stones and limestone. So here we go. So tonight's evening, let me get it to move. Tonight's evening, we're going to talk about the what of limestone, why it's used, where you can find it, and who was involved in it. So I'm going to turn it over to Leanne to start with our story.
Okay, so we're going to start with what is limestone. I think we all intrinsically know that limestone is a rock, but when you're walking along, how do you know what is limestone, what is granite, and what is it about Guelph limestone? So limestone in particular is a sedimentary rock. Skeletal fragments of marine organisms, and this area of the country was at one time the part of a glacier and a receding glacier and a bottom of a water body. And so the makeup includes coral and mollusks. And Guelph in particular is very unique. We're seated on top of what is actually called the Guelph Formation. And it's a 30-kilometer wide swath. We've got a map in the next slide. But what's particularly interesting about the Guelph limestone is the magnesium content actually gives it a bit of a different color than most limestone. So when you think of a place like Kingston, which is actually, Kingston's nickname is the Limestone City, even though Guelph has more limestone buildings by population than Kingston does, the limestone in Kingston is a really hard gray limestone. It's a different composition of limestone. So we have a very unique limestone here in Guelph. And what's wonderful about it in terms of quarrying is that it is very soft and easy to carve, making it the absolute perfect building material. So the Guelph Formation is kind of that greenish brown centerpiece right there. And you can see that the city of Guelph is sitting right on top of it. But what is wonderful about the city of Guelph as well is that the river valleys of the two rivers have a great deal of exposed limestone, which means we don't have to quarry deep. We can actually quarry from the surface. When you look at the cross section on the next slide, you'll kind of see where that mineable, quarryable, if quarryable is a word, limestone sits. And the arrow that you see there in the center where there's a depression is actually where the Guelph Lime Quarry, or what we call the Doe Lime Quarry, that is where the mining has taken place in that quarry. But the yellow area, the Guelph Formation, you can see on the left that the Speed River has exposed a lot of that Guelph Formation, and we have a lot of quarry faces that are above the river line along the river where quarrying activities have taken place over the last almost 200 years. So we'll move on to a little bit more about those quarries. Let's take a look at what the Guelph Formation looks like from the surface, from the eyes, from current perspective. So on the left, you see the Doe Lime Quarry, the Guelph Quarry off of Wellington and the Hanlon, and the exposed limestone there. And then another area of town where it is exposed is on the Reformatory lands, also known as the York lands, along the rail line. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the history of those sites as we move through the presentation. So let's move to the why. Why is Guelph limestone so special? And why, most importantly, have we become this city that is so well known for its limestone heritage? Well, as I said, its ability to be carved and formed into blocks has made it the ideal building stone. The fact that it's on the surface means that it's easily quarried. Abundant supply. Stone didn't become the building material of choice at the beginning of the city. So the city, when it was first founded, there were indigenous peoples here. It was the hunting grounds, and there wasn't a permanent encampment in Guelph. But when the land was cleared, the most abundant supply was wood. So wood frame buildings were the cheapest and easiest way to get a building up fast. As buildings were replaced and the permanent settlement started to grow, stone is an excellent building material simply because of its energy efficiency. It's cool in the summer, warm in the winter, and it's
trying to order any
fire
sandwich.
So lime mortar, the ability to create lime was also an abundant material because you could create a lime kiln and its fire resistancy. So we started to build more stone around the mid 1860s. 1860 to 1865 is when the city of wood frame construction started to take on a whole new shape. With limestone construction coinciding, I'm not sure which came first, the chicken or the egg, but stonemasons started to arrive as well. And so obviously you can't just have limestone, you also need skilled craftsmen to build with that raw material. So as stonemasons arrived, everything was being built out of stone. Our mills, our houses, even wood frame houses needed a stone chimney. Bridges, foundations, lintels, and sills, all of the decorative carvings on some of the buildings we're going to show you. Later, the lime being used for concrete and aggregate for roads, which we're going to talk about more when we talk about the Reformatory and its role in building highways like the 401.
So this is my task, and to tell you where the Guelph Quarries are. So Leanne found this article in the 1927 centennial edition of the Mercury. And you can see that it was a letter addressed to Dr. Moore from John Galt and written when Guelph was 3 months old. So 3 months old, one of the earliest letters from the infant city. Now, if we look down to see what he says, upwards of 160 buildings are engaged, and the approach to it on one side is probably the finest avenue in the world, being upwards of 7 miles in length. So today that's Waterloo Avenue that he's talking about. And this is how they came up from Shades Mill. It is an opening through the forest, 200 feet in width, with a lofty vale of about 130 feet high on each side. And he once said in one of his books, it would rival Niagara Falls as a tourist attraction. It was so beautiful. So this is a key sentence. I almost regret that the progress of improvement will soon deform it with many breaches. By the way, in clearing for a quarry, so that tells us that there was a quarry in process in 1827, 3 months after the founding. So we figure that's the earliest quarry, and we're not quite sure where it is. We do know that limestone was quarried from the riverbeds. This is a picture down in Royal City Park behind the LCBO Plaza. So the first quarry in 1827, the limestone quarried from the riverbed. These were exposed stone formations above the ground. And it was solid bedrock that was close to the surface, which is a key reason why we don't have a lot of underground parking lots in Guelph, because you'd have to blast the limestone out. And where I live, it's Village on the Green at the end of Water Street, our houses were made in factories and they were supposed to be sunk in the ground, except they found that the ground was limestone. So now they're 3 stories high with no basements. And this is a quotation from the 1911 story of the opening of the quarry. And it's what Leanne told you about the dolomitic limestone. And they did say the Speed River in the report. It wasn't, I don't know why they didn't call it the Hermosa, which is superior quality and excellent for building purposes, lime manufacture and road making. So that's what the Prison Farm report said about the limestone in Guelph. So Leanne will tell you about some of the locations of the quarries.
Great, thanks, Susan. So one of the earliest references to a quarry after John Galt's reference in 1827 was on a map known as the Balinard Survey. Balinard is actually a ancestral home of the Chadwick family in Ireland, I believe. And so he called his property Balinard. And the arrows mark a quarry face 23 feet high along the Waterloo Road. And so that is the property that is now known as Dolime. And he had marked out a survey. These road and lots that you see never materialized. This was kind of his conceptual drawing of a survey that he was going to be selling land. So the presence of the quarry face and the active quarrying is the first reference that we have, and this is 1856, of the quarrying operations at the Dolime site. So it has been in continuous operation for over 160 years. I know that Wellington Water Watchers and certainly all of our
Oh, sure, thank you.
all of those the calls to end the quarrying activities there are, I think, from a personal note, very well placed in that this site has been quarried continuously from as early as 1856, and its natural life should be over soon. The Guelph Quarry in 1941, you can see the Speed River running through it. You can see the size of the quarry face, and you can see the lime kiln operations in this aerial photo from 1941. There's still trees on the property, and the depth of the quarry face has not yet breached what is the Aramosa member, which is the water table that accesses our water supply. So this is early quarrying activities. Now you can see where the water is. That is below the water line. That is below the protective layer of our water supply, and the quarrying operations below that line were legal under the Ministry of Natural Resources permit, as long as the water was being replaced. So there are water operations there require that the site is pumped as the water comes up through the aquifer. And so that gives you a sense of the size of the quarry face there. So another reference to a quarry was found in 1877 in a map, Birmingham's Quarry, and this is located on Huron Street and Alice. And so we've found, and you'll see a quarry lot on the other side. That lot is actually still exposed. You can actually, at one time there was a Habitat for Humanity project that was that second smaller circle on Huron Street was going to be a development there on a donated lot. But guess what they found when they tried to excavate for the basement? They found solid limestone, and that project was abandoned. But that lot is still visible today. Today, if you go to the next slide, you can see an aerial slide from approximately 1960, and that is the chemical building. The Uniroyal Chemical Building is the large building on the left. And at the far right, you'll see kind of a pond and a ridge of limestone. And that was the site of what was known as the Birmingham Quarry. So on the next slide, you'll see what's happening today. That quarry has been, that pond has been filled in. The surface rock has been removed, and there is a residential development being constructed on that land as of this very moment in time. Guelph Sand and Gravel Company operated at the Lafarge site in the junction area. You can see the rail line coming through in the bottom right of the picture, and you can see excavation happening. This was primarily quarried for aggregate and concrete from about the 1930s until it closed in the early 2000s, and is now the subject of a development application for a mixed-use commercial and residential development. The housing project, the housing development that you see is Memorial Crescent. That gives you kind of the dimensions, and the road linking that is Paisley Road. So that kind of gives you a sense of where we are in the Lafarge Quarry. That was the best photo that I was able to see of active quarrying operations. After it closed, it became quite overgrown, and Mother Nature reclaimed the land.
So I'd now like to tell you a little bit about the Reformatory Quarries. This picture is probably around 1930, maybe, and this is a stone crusher. And so you can see the prisoners at work. The quarry, the reformatory site was chosen in 1909 because not just of its quality farmland, but because of this high quality limestone that was found on here. And I'll tell you a little bit about its history as we go through this. And the prisoners lived in temporary wooden quarters while they quarried the limestone to build their own prison cells. I think that's an amazing thing that they had to dig the stone and then build their prison cells and the administration center and the mechanical building and all of the buildings on the site, as well as the walls and the ponds and everything like that. So this quarry was a huge one. You can see the size of the face here. This is a picture of the rail line that took the stone from the quarry to up about a half a mile to the prison site, and also took the stone and the crushed stone out to various other building sites in the province. When Leanne mentioned that the gravel from this quarry was used to build the 401. And I believe for the QEW too, wasn't it, Leanne?
Yeah, it was around the 1950s when the quarry stone went by rail to the Campbellville Junction using the Guelph Junction Railway.
So this was a hugely active quarry and supplied a lot of stone. Now, if you go down, you can enter this. It's on one of the trails. If you park at the Barber Scout Camp and walk under the stone road, you'll be right on the trail that's on the east side of the Aramasa River. And it's a beautiful, beautiful place. You can do your rock climbing there. As Leanne said, I climbed all the way up to the top to take pictures. It's a beautiful, it reminds me a great deal of the Bruce Peninsula up around the Cabot Head and Manitoulin, where you can climb the Cup and Saucer Trail. So imagine if we had walking trails and Zoom lines and all that kind of thing in this particular area. But this is also a really interesting discovery. And this is where we owe thanks to Brian Scarrett and to Heritage Guelph's research committee, who discovered this particularly interesting kind of fact about it. This is the map of what was William Allen's farm. So you can see his name on it. At the top here would be what we would call York Road. And just below the bottom of this picture would be what we call Stone Road. And that's the Aramasa River running up through there. So William Allen owned all this land. And so he owned the land where the quarry was located. And when he died rather prematurely, his son, David Allen, took over and extended the quarrying operations there. And David Allen was quite a prolific diarist. He wrote a lot of entries about what he was doing there. And then you can get Guelph, the book from the Historical Society about Guelph, its early days and later, that's by David Allen, where he wrote his observations about various parts of the city. So you can see on the little inset map that land is now the prison. It says on Ontario Reformatory. So they sold the land to the Reformatory. And this is an entry, thanks to Brian Scarrett for finding this, from 1862, Tuesday, August 26th. That's his writing, and underneath it is what it says. Fine weather today, getting in timber with both teams this forenoon, and one team at stone from my own quarry, the other carting hay on the farm. And he goes on to talk about where that stone was being taken. So this is an interesting discovery that's new to quite a few people. He used the stone to build the area that we call now the Spring Mill Distillery. He's rebuilding a dam here for the Allen's Mills. So the Allen's Mills, because it was owned by his family, and in the 1860s, this picture is 1869, he replaced the wooden buildings on that site, the wooden mill buildings, with limestone from his own quarry. So that gives us today what we know as the Spring Mill Distillery. So you can see the lower building on the right is the oldest building of the complex, and you may now know it as the Ward Bar. So go inside it, and you'll be right inside the stone from David Allen's quarry down on the present Reformatory lands. We were talking to Cooper Sleeman, John Sleeman's son, last week, and he was delighted to find this out because they didn't know where the stone had come from. So it's going to be part of the distillery story. And so as Leanne said, there's the rock face that's now gone back, of course, from when it was in 1911, but it's still an impressive amount of rocks. The only thing we don't want the city to do is sell it to an aggregate company to make more gravel. Don't let them do that, Leanne. Don't let them sell the quarry. And here's a picture of the Junction Railway going past another of the cliffs in the quarry. And the Junction Railway goes 14 kilometers, the only city-owned railway in Canada. And Cooper Sleeman said it brings all of the grains to the distillery for making the gin and the vodka there. It all comes from local farms. So I told him he should now create a new drink called Gin and Tonic on the Rocks, because that's what it was called. So that's what it looks like. Now Leanne will take you to some other quarries.
That's great. So we've covered the biggest quarries, the ones that most people know about. So the Reformatory Quarry and the Dolime Quarry are ones that are so visible in our urban landscape because they're still above ground and have very significant quarry faces. So I'm going to talk about some of the smaller quarries that operated that are fairly invisible now, but they're still there. So these are the ones that were fun to find, to see the remnants, and most of all, to see the buildings and the people behind them. So the first set of quarries is the Kennedy Quarry. So if you go back the slide, you'll see number 1 on the map is along the Waterloo Road. And David Kennedy owned a significant amount of land between Edinburgh and Meadowview. And so the Kennedy Quarries were located on a ridge along that section.
Next.
Yeah. So this is a picture from about 1960. It's behind the houses on the north side of Waterloo between Edinburgh and Meadowview. And you can kind of see the significant slope of the land on the left. So the ridge between Galt Street and Waterloo Avenue. And so those backyards all along that stretch back onto that quarry face. And again, what we found in most of our field work is that these quarries are, after their use has concluded, nature reclaims them, which I think is some of the beauty is that they're still evident, but you have to look for them. So here's a view of that same kind of quarry today. There's lots of exposed stone still on that ridge. but trees and shrubs and landscaping has taken over. Some of the properties along there have built retaining walls and they've backfilled to have flatter backyards. But again, the remnants of the quarries are still there. Kennedy also owned a quarry on Metcalfe Street near Aramasa. There's commercial plazas in that area now, and the ridge between the Guelph General Hospital lands and Delhi Street also have a significant drop off. And although there's a lot of grass there and a significant slope, those were once quarried lands as well. There's a significant slope on Aramasa between the Rexall Pharmacy and the Family and Children's Services building at Metcalfe and Aramasa, and that was a slope that was also quarried as well. So the next set of quarries, number 2, the Bell Quarries, or I think the next one might be Emsley. Go to the next slide. Oh, Bell's Quarry, Emsley's Quarry. So Emsley's Quarry was number 3. Emsley's Quarry was along Bristol Street between Bristol and Waterloo, and Fleet Street, which was now known as Yorkshire. And those Emsley Street, actually right in the middle of that number 3, is a street called Emsley Street. And Emsley was the ridge of that quarry. And there's an advertisement from an 1873 directory where Robert Emsley, one of the Emsley brothers, was advertising for building stone. Slater's Quarry, another small kind of backyard quarry, which was quite common. If you're driving down Waterloo Road, the Essex, Nottingham, along those ridges, Bristol, a lot of the buildings, quarry workers lived in small cottages, and they quarried the rock, limestone, building stone directly from their properties. And so Slater's Quarry on Essex Street is a good example. There's a ridge along the back of the south side of Essex Street where the properties slope down quite a bit, and those remnants of Slater's Quarry are still visible. Other smaller quarries that we found reference to, and these are newly found references because we're constantly, Susan and I are always looking for new information to add to this presentation. And so McQuillan's Quarry is actually one we knew about. So McQuillan actually had several quarries, but there was one along Mill Street near Goldie Mill. So Mill Street is where Dufferin Street is now, between Dufferin Street and Goldie's Mill. And again, you'll see a significant slope along those lands where McQuillan's had a quarry. McQuillan, Arthur and Bernard McQuillan also owned land along in the Yorklands in the south east corner where the southeast corner of Victoria Road and Stone, where the old detention center was. And that is where their farm was located. And although there wasn't a quarry there, the stone quarry, the stone that they used for the reformatory property did not include those lands. It's just where they lived. McQuillan's are also, although it is a concrete structure, the Bowstring Bridge on Stone Road, a designated single lane bridge over the Aramasa branch between Stone and Watson, is known also as McQuillan's Bridge because it was built on McQuillan's property. The Davidson Quarry, James Davidson Quarry on the corner of Waterloo and Edinburgh, is noted in the historical records in the 1870s. And a note about the Ambrose Quarry, again on Waterloo Avenue, noted in about 1920, that J.L. Ambrose and Son were operating a quarry on Waterloo Avenue. And we don't have an exact address for that. Still, see, there's still so much more to discover. And that's one of the great mysteries that we continue to. The next presentation will have even more information. So who were Guelph's quarrymen? Because what's the point of having a lot of stone if you've got nobody to build it with?
Oh, is it me?
I think so.
It's you to me. So in this list from 1843 and 1847, if you look in this section here, it tells you that in 1843 there were only 13 stonemasons in Guelph, but by 1847 there were 21. So as the stonemasons heard more about the quarrying and people needed stonemasons to build the houses, more stonemasons came to Guelph. And that's contributed to the growth of the city being made of stone in the 1860s, because more of them came to Guelph. And this is another paragraph from the newspaper. And here it tells you that stone had not been used up to that time because there was lots of timber. Leanne mentioned that. The chief reason, however, was that prior to 1854, there were not the requisite number of stonemasons in the settlement to carry out any ambitious building programs. So, for example, David Allen in 1869 was quarrying then to change his timber buildings to stone, and therefore he had workers to do that. We'd like to tell you a little bit more in detail about Matthew Bell, because he's did a lot of works in Guelph that you might recognize. So he was a builder, a stone carver, and an architect who came from England and arrived in Guelph in 1850. He lived on Water Street and operated a quarry on Water Street West. So his buildings are the ones listed here, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about each one of them. So these are some examples of his work around the city, and I'll highlight a few of them as we talk. But if you walk along Water Street, is on Water Street, Leanne, or just up from Water Street? What's the street up? Where his workshop is. If you look just
Albert.
Albert Street, thanks. So if you look just behind Albert Street, you'll see this little tiny building kind of sideways to Albert Street. It's now been beautifully restored as a house. That was the place where Matthew Bell did his work in the winter. He did statues, memorial statues for Woodlawn Cemetery, and some of the carvings that he did for buildings, he did in that little tiny workshop. So as you're walking along, look for the gap in two houses and you'll see it down in the back. So some of the houses are these, and you can, if we were walking, this would be our walking tour, which is why we were starting at 6. You would see 49 Albert Street, which is the first house that Matthew Bell built for his family. And if you look as you're going past at the pediments over the front windows, the pilasters, those are kind of flat pillars against the front of a house, and a carved wreath and a lamb's head above the door. And those are similar to the Morton Lodge portico that was the front of Frederick Stone's house that's now on the University of Guelph campus. And this one is probably the most extravagant example of Bell's work. He was called a figurative stone carver, which was a rare type then. And because the limestone was so soft and easily carved, he could do this kind of elaborate work. So you'll notice the kind of Gothic pattern over the windows and the 6 heads. And this house he built, I guess he needed a bigger house for his 6 sons and his 4 daughters. And the House of Heads is still there today and looks beautiful. But what it was really his business card. So he could show the house to people and say, look what I can do. I can carve heads. I can do this kind of decorative work. And then people might be able to pick pieces that they wanted for their own houses. And as far as I know, maybe Leanne knows, we don't know who those heads were. Do we, Leanne? Do we know now?
We're told, I mean, I think it's anecdotal that they were members of his family and that he was creating them as kind of advertising for his stone carving business.
but there they are, permanently there.
Yeah.
And he did the Bull's Head over on the right side of the old city hall. And when I do walking tours, I tell people that's not what went on in the council chambers with a lot of bull, but it was for the meat market that was down below in City Hall. Now, the story of his death, I like this story. Some people have told me it's not true and don't tell that story. But if I tell it confidently, you'll believe me. So Matthew Bell was carving the corbels at the back of the chapel of Church of Our Lady. So you can see here the two faces. But if you look at the other corbels on the rest of the chapels, they're left plain and square. And I was told that he was working on those corbels when he fell from the scaffolding and died. Now, someone else corrected me. I've been corrected several times and said he died of influenza. But I don't like that story. I like the story of him dying in the middle of his stone carving, because that's a nice Guelph story. So you can take my story or that one about influenza, whichever you like. And take a look when you walk past the back of the chapels and you'll see the uncarved corbels. The end?
Okay, so I'm going to talk about my favorite stonemason quarry owner, and that is David Kennedy. Historians in Guelph know that there are actually two David Kennedys. There's David Kennedy, the mason, contractor, builder, quarry owner, and then there's David Johnston Kennedy, who was an artist. And so our David Kennedy was born in Falkirk, England, Scotland. And he was a mason in Scotland. We actually have him in the 1851 census, recorded at the age of 22, living with his parents in Denny, Stirlingshire, and his occupation is listed on that census as a mason. He arrived in Canada with Thomas Dobby, who was also another Guelph stonemason we'll talk about. In 1851, he was working in Sherbrooke, Quebec. And by 1854, he has arrived in Guelph. And he's found himself a wife, Eliza, in 1855, Eliza Cumberland from Hamilton, Ontario, and they had their first child in 1856. So in 1858, and they had 11 children, by the way. In 1858, where are you going to fit all 11 children? He starts building a house for himself. At this time, he is working as a stonemason.
Sorry,
he's working as a stonemason. He has a quarry. He's working on Waterloo. He owns the land and he's quarrying and working prolifically as a builder. He went into partnership with a number of other stonemasons. So in the historical record, we have Kennedy and Pike, Kennedy and Dobby, Kennedy and Morrison. So he is partnering with other masons and other quarry owners in the building trades. And keep in mind that the 1860s through the 1870s and the 1880s, massive building boom. So there was plenty of work for stonemasons in Guelph as the building boom was occurring. So George and Albert Pike were well-known stonemasons. The Emsley brothers, John, James, and Robert Emsley, were along Bristol Street, as we said earlier. Thomas Dobby arrived with Kennedy and was working in masonry with him. The Morrison, James Morrison, James Davidson, and the McQuillan family, Father James, his sons Arthur and Frank, and grandson Bernard, again, prolific builders of stone construction in the city of Guelph. So I think we're going to take a walk now, Susan.
Yes, we're going to take a walk. I had my first experiment with Google Earth, drawing a map. So if we had been able to take you for a walk, this is the walk we would have taken you on. So we're just going to tell you a little bit about the places you would have seen if you went around on our walk. So the starting point at Meadowview Avenue, I'll talk about that in a minute. So this is the route that was on the map that you just saw. and we can send that to you if you're interested. Went over. So we'll start at Meadowview Park. This is on Meadowview Avenue. It was on Doors Open about 5 years ago. And this is the beautiful photograph of what the house looked like. And the owners are working to restore it. You can see some of the beautiful carving over the windows. I believe this is a kind of unique window topping, almost like a draped curtain that's over the top of the curtain. And it sits up on the hill. Leanne mentioned that the quarrying below down to Waterloo Avenue. So this kind of overlooks that area.
The original address was Waterloo Avenue and Meadowview
Oh,
Avenue.
you said, yes, thank you.
The original address was Waterloo. Meadowview Avenue was the driveway to get to the house, so it faces onto Waterloo Avenue.
Okay, over to you.
Okay, so Kennedy's sons went into quarrying and stonemasonry as well. Because he owned the quarries and the land, his sons built houses along Waterloo Avenue. So we have the home of William Kennedy, one of his older sons, at 237 Waterloo. There's actually in the gable end, there's a marker, a carved signature. Often stonemasons would leave a mason's mark in the buildings that they built, and William Kennedy has his name carved in the gable. 225 Waterloo Avenue was the home of one of his other sons, Robert Cumberland Kennedy. It's a 2-story Georgian, and it is again both 237 and 225. The backyard of those homes. The quarry face is still part of the landscape in the backyard. You can see the exposed stone in the yards of those homes. Before we finish off with Kennedy's, I did want to mention that David Kennedy, Susan's story about the death of Matthew Bell was interesting, but without primary sources to validate the historical record.
Hey.
But the death of David Kennedy was a tragic and killed by a falling wall of quarried rock, and that is in the historical record. In 1893, I'm sorry, in the late afternoon of October 13th, 1893, he went to the site of the construction of the Guelph Opera House. It's where the Guelph Community Health Center is located today. And it was a tragic and untimely death. He was killed while supervising the excavation for the new opera house. He was inspecting the wall and the wall fell on him. And some of his men shouted at the wall, and I'm reading directly from the newspaper article. Some of the men shouted that the wall was giving way, and Mr. Kennedy started to run, but his foot caught in an obstruction and he fell. And before he could recover himself, the entire mass of the masonry fell, and he was literally crushed to death. So that was the untimely end of quarry owner, builder, and master mason David Kennedy.
Almost as good as the Matthew Bell story.
Again, we're going to talk Elmsley. We're taking a walk, and since we're walking past Meadowview and we're walking down Waterloo Avenue, we are going to also pass the lands of Elmsley's Quarry. And you can see the approximate dimensions of Elmsley's Quarry along Bristol Street. And there it is. As you're walking along Bristol Street, you will see remnants of a building wall that mark the area in a vacant piece of land between two houses. You can see it from the street, and that marks the one of the quarry faces of Robert Elmsley's Quarry.
It's probably one of the clearest ones that we can see, isn't it?
It's recently recently been clear cut. There were mostly Manitoba maples surrounding the property and growing into the property. And a lot of those Manitobas were recently cut. So it's even more evident today where that quarry face is.
And then if you continued on our walk, you would cross the Speed River at the Gauss Bridge. So we just wanted to show you a beautiful, beautiful example of Guelph limestone. And the Gauss Bridge from 1897 is one of only 10 stone bridges left in Ontario. I was at St. Mary's a while ago, and one of the store owners was boasting about their stone bridges. And he said, "Oh, there's no others like these." And I said, "Have you ever been to Guelph?" And he said, "No." And I said, "Well, we have one too, and ours is nicer than yours. So if you go to St. Mary's, you can see more of the stone bridges, but we have one of only 10. And as you walk across, follow our route and go down Edinburgh Road towards Water Street, we just want to tell you that in the former times, there were 3 bridges on Edinburgh Road. There were actually 10 islands in the Speed River between Gordon Street and Silver Creek. And that top braid of the river is where Wellington Street is now. It was filled in the 1950s and made into Wellington Street. So that's why we no longer have 3 bridges there. This is a picture of one of them. You can see the little boys fishing from it. It's beautiful. I'm sorry that they took it down. So that's Edinburgh Road that crosses that bridge. And then as you walk along Water Street, these houses are on the north side, almost at the end. And we just were given a story written by a granddaughter of one of the residents of one of the houses. 289 Water Street, you can't see from Water Street, but you'll see there's a driveway going down on the right side of the Water Street Church. And if you were to follow it right down, it looks like it's just woods. You would see this cottage on the left. And it's actually beautifully restored now. It was kind of a wreck before. 291 Water Street is right beside where I live, where I'm sitting right now. And this cottage is also restored. And it was a part of the Howitt farm. Mr. Howitt, Quaker Howitt, when he came to Guelph in the 1830s, owned about 700 acres along what we know now as the Hanlon. So this was one of the cottages that the family members lived in. And then at the end, Water Street ends with a fence and our houses are on the right. And then if you keep walking along the trail, you'll see this strange protrusion from the earth. And it's really fascinating. It used to be invisible before the hydro clear cut this whole property. The children climb on it. My granddaughters love to climb on it. And this is a remnant of Bell's Quarry that you can see quite clearly. You can see the slabs of limestone and how they could be cut to make a house. If you continue along the top trail, you'll see to your right a path that goes down to a path that goes through the woods before the river trail. And you can see this part of Bell's Quarry as well. It's almost entirely grown in now, but there's the quarry walls that are left in the woods. And it's a beautiful walk, and it takes you back onto the lower river trail. And then you can go back along to Edinburgh Road if you wish. So it makes a nice walk. So to conclude, I'd just like to mention what's happening now. So it's not that we're recommending Doug Burpee, but he's one of the well-known modern stonemasons. He has his stone carving shop in the ward. And from his website is a picture of this piece of work that was the buildings to charge up the street railway that George Sleeman built. and it's now the Grey Stone Apartments. So there's a picture of a modern stonemason at work. And how do we get stonemasons now? One of the key places is the Willowbank School of Restoration Arts. And this is a line from their website, pioneering an innovative approach to heritage conservation in our unique 3-year diploma program, Theory and Practice Intersect. And you can actually take summer courses there on different aspects of heritage restoration. Their textbook is this house called Willowbank, and they use it to teach the students all different kinds of restoration arts. And you can go and take a tour of that. It's in Niagara-on-the-Lake. And if you want a fun summer course, you could do dry stone walling and build one in your very own backyard. This is a class that learned dry stone walling. And so that looks like one of the walls in the reformatory now. So we'd like to thank you for being with us and exploring Guelph's limestone heritage. I'll see if Leanne has more to tell you, and then we'll conclude and take questions.
I think we should start taking questions. I mean, we've just touched the surface, Susan.
So to speak.
We've constantly found new information. You know, just when we think we know everything we need to know, we will come across something in a primary source we're working with, or Heritage Guelph will add to the research based on a building that they are working on. And so it's really nice to be able to add to the narrative and accumulate this knowledge over time. So, you know, if there are viewers there who if you have a stone house, if you know the history of your house, you've got old photos of a stone house in a former life, we'd love to have you share it with us. There's a Facebook group called Stone Houses of Guelph. And so we publish kind of biographies of houses and tips for caring for stone. You know, one of the things that is very frustrating for stone construction is that in the 1920s, 30s, as early as the 1890s, the artistry and the craftsmanship of stonemasonry was compromised by cheaper imported building materials such as Portland cement. It was seen as a superior product because it was harder and more rigid and more durable. And so a number of stone buildings, including work on the Basilica of Our Lady, and including the old Carnegie Library, used Portland cement for not just mortar, but as a building material for foundations. And the Portland product needs a specific type of geography. And so the freeze-thaw cycle of Southern Ontario, Portland cement just cracked and trapped moisture inside buildings and deteriorated them, in some cases beyond repair, to the point where they were crumbling and compromised structurally. So what we've learned is that the artistry and craftsmanship of original methods. So many of the Scottish stonemasons, Irish stonemasons who built the limestone heritage of this city knew what they were doing because they imported the technology and the science of lime construction from Europe, from Scotland. And if you think of the bridges and the castles and the lighthouses of Scotland and Ireland that are still intact after 500, 600, 700 years, they knew what they were doing. And so their lime mortar, you know, the recipe, those original construction methods are coming back today. And so Willowbank is teaching those original methods because the limestone, the rubble stone kind of construction was very fitted, kind of like a dry stone wall, very secure, very structurally sound. They built these buildings to last. So I know, and I know Susan shares my feelings on this, but when we tear down a limestone building today in our city, whether it's a farmhouse or a livery stable or any limestone structure, We're tearing down something that was built and meant to last hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. They knew what the heck they were doing. They weren't just quarry owners, they were master masons, and they were building things to last multiple generations. So I feel that we have a role in educating the public about the mastery of their work, and acting as stewards to make sure that a new generation, generations plural, so that those buildings and structures are here to enjoy hundreds of years from today.
Leanne, we forgot about the Limestone Graveyard.
Oh, we did. I took the slide out because if we tell you, we have to kill you. There is, we have torn down a lot of limestone buildings. And so thankfully, one thing that the city has done is that they've retained a supply of building stone, of Guelph building stone. So when you're building, I didn't mention this early on in the geological presentation, but it's only about the top 200 feet of a limestone, surface limestone, where you get the soft amber hued building stone. The deeper you go, the more of the harder, brittle gray limestone you get. And so it's got a bit of a different composition, not as good for building. So that building stone, that amber hued building stone is in restricted supply. So we do have building limestone for the purpose of repairing, restoring, or new construction for designated buildings or bridges or structures, or buildings on the Heritage Register, so that property owners can access building limestone in order to properly act as stewards of their heritage buildings.
And then that's formerly St. James's Church, now the Church of the Disciples, they used stone from that graveyard to put the elevator addition on the back of the church. And you can see the difference in the color to see the limestone that was protected and wrapped up all those years added to the back of the church. And so they could use it. And that was a good use of our supply.
Yep. So we have some questions. Do we know who did some recent stone restoration on the museum? I believe that was Doug Burpie's crew working on the museum. And his crew also did the Elora Mill. If you've seen the restoration of the Elora Mill, that was Doug Burpie's crew as well. There are a number of stonemasons in Guelph. He has quite a number of apprentices who've gone off on their own, but there's a lot of reputable stonemasons in Guelph who are using traditional methods as well. I don't think I can mention them all on this presentation, but we can certainly follow up if you, and Heritage Guelph is an excellent resource, by the way. If you are looking to restore or repair any masonry, I would recommend that you contact Heritage Guelph and get access to experts in the field, and they can get you in touch with a number of different local stonemasons who do heritage restoration work. There's a few of them. I'm just looking at some of the questions. Any chance there will be a tour when we can safely do so? I would say yes, because Susan and I have been trying to do this tour for 2 years now, and a slideshow just it's just not the same as walking and touching and really seeing these quarries close up. So I would say yes.
Because I took all of Leanne's work. Tell them about the article, Leanne. Took Leanne's work and turned it into a walking tour. So that's, we can see all the ones on Waterloo Avenue. And it's in Historic Guelph at 2012. Is it?
I believe so. If you go to the guelphhistoricalsociety.com and look on articles, I think if you even Google Limestone Quarry Guelph, it comes up as a link in Google. A lot of this information about the master masons, the location of the quarries is in that article. What else do we have? Any other questions? Put your questions in the chat. Or we've got a small group here. I think we can be informal. Just turn your mic on and add your knowledge, your questions, your comments to the conversation. There's a lot of resources at the Guelph Civic Museum as well. One of the resources that is available is the Gordon Cooling, who was an early architectural historian and artist, a professor of fine art at the University of Guelph, who he inventoried most of Guelph's historic buildings at a time when heritage conservation wasn't the popular thing to do. Everyone wanted to tear down and rebuild, and he inventoried and created a legacy of some of our earlier buildings with the knowledge that he had, and that inventory is online at the Guelph Civic Museum site. So that's another excellent resource if you want to explore the history of your home. That's a really good place to start. You know, we talk about early quarries and buildings, entire buildings. And I think the other thing to remember is that there's elements within buildings, whether it be the mantle of a fireplace or a chimney or a foundation, that were also built with stone. So quarrying wasn't just about building an entire structure. Quarrying was an essential activity in the development of Guelph. I'll turn it back over to Sabin to wrap us up if there's no more questions.
If anyone else has any questions, I'll just leave it for another minute if anyone wants to unmute. I've got a few messages of people saying they're signing off and saying thank you for the presentation. It was very informative, and for not being an actual in-person walk, it was a wonderful slideshow you put together. Really appreciated that. Thank you so much for your contribution to the 2Rivers Festival. And I hope everybody has a great night. Unless anyone else has any last minute questions. Doesn't sound like it. Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, Leanne and Susan.
You're welcome. Thanks, Leanne.
And to you too, Susan. It's always a pleasure working with you.
Yes, we do a good job together, don't we?
Perfect.
Thanks everybody.
Have a good night.